Well, last time we looked at the first 30 verses of 1 Samuel 17. And so we're looking tonight at David versus Goliath, part 2, verses 31 to verse 58. And in verse 31, now when the words came to David, remember, David came down to bring some bread and cheese to his brothers and his commanding officers, and all of a sudden this giant comes out cursing God and blaspheming, and David's like, what has been going on? And he finds out this has been going on for 40 days. 40 days. They're listening to this guy just curse and blaspheme God, and everybody's just standing there and listening to this guy, and both sides on each side of the hill, they're in the valley of Elah, which is there today, by the way, and they're shouting and screaming, and they all go back and, pop popcorn and have s'mores and wait till the next day to repeat this. And Goliath is saying, come on out, and somebody can beat me, we'll be your servants. Lie. But if I beat you guys or whoever your champion is, and you be our servants. And they didn't believe they really had anybody that could take on this giant. But when David heard that, they're like, what's going on? And they said, not only that, but the king first said, he'll make you a rich man. No takers. And then he said, I'll give you my daughter to marry. You can be part of the royal family. No takers. And then this would be the one that everybody would jump on. Lifetime, no taxes for you and all of your family and extended family. And surely it would have been 10 people in line fighting over for that first position. Still no takers. And when David heard this, he said, you've got to tell me, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that somebody doesn't have faith in stepping out and taking this giant down. And so he had them repeat it, and David said, man, if I were here, I would have taken this guy down 40 days ago. And eventually what David said, reported, came back to King Saul. And they just call him Saul here. And so Saul sent for him. Now, again, guys, this is where sometimes we have difficulty in Eastern writings versus Western writings. In our Western culture, we have a very strong sense of how everything needs to be laid out in a chronological order. But the Eastern mind, and of course we're talking thousands of years ago, they had a different way of how they would tell a story and what comes first and second and so forth. And we even do it that sometimes too. We'll even though chronological, this is where that part of the story would fit in, but I'm going to save it till the end because that's the juicy part that it's really going to, I want to end with the big bang, And so I'll wait until that part of the story at the end. But, and so you say, well, how would, Saul not know who David was? Because we just read that David would come up with his harp when Saul was attacked by these demon spirits and harassed, and as David played the music, the demons would leave Saul alone, and Saul made David his armor bearer, it says. And so it appears that David, and it says Saul loved David, and so it just appears that Saul knows a lot about David, and he knows him well, and he loves him, and he's like, David, my armor bearer, bring him on. Oh, David, so good to see you, and all this. But that's not happening here. And you're saying, why is that not happening? Because it's very possible that chronologically, David playing the harp and driving the demons away from Saul happened after this battle. It's possible. It's also possible that Saul just has a bad memory. It's also possible that again, Saul just didn't connect all the dots, that this is the David that is the guy who plays the harp that I love, that's my armor bearer or whatever. But anyway, we're going to see that, and that's part of the explanation. But David comes to Saul, and he says, let no man's heart fail because of him, Goliath. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now, again, this could sound like David's being prideful and arrogant. But as we go on and see David and the nature of David, we realize that's not the case. So what was going on here is that David was just welling up with faith. Now remember earlier in chapter 14, where Jonathan said to his armor bearer, hey, God could win this battle with one man or a whole army. It doesn't matter because God's going to win it. And so Jonathan goes out against the Philistine army by himself. And again, somebody could say, wow, that's awfully presumptuous of Jonathan, or that's often arrogant or prideful. Well, again, it could look that way to the natural eye, but as we learn, it was just he had tremendous faith to believe God to do great things. And this is where David's at. He's not being arrogant. He's just saying, I know God can use me to defeat this blasphemous giant. And in verse 33, well, Saul said to David, you are not able. You know, at one point, Jesus says to Peter, you are not mindful of the things of God. You're only mindful of the things of man. The Bible says in Corinthians that the natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit. They're foolishness to him. That the man who's in the flesh can only see sight, and he doesn't have the ability to walk by faith. So he's seen, Goliath as a giant and David as this young boy. We don't know how old he was. Most speculate he was a young teenage boy, maybe 13, 15. He might have been 28. We don't know. But either way, in this culture, he was considered a young boy. And so he's looking at it going, this guy's giant, you're small. This guy is an experienced warrior. You have no experience in battle that I know of. And he just went back and forth, and every single time, naturally, David, there's no way you can win this. Interesting comparison. Remember when the 12 spies went in to spy out the land, and they came back with the spoils? And immediately Joshua and Caleb just had hearts of faith, and they're going, let's go get it right now. I can't wait. And they thought the other 10 spies were going to say the same thing, and they said, stop just a minute. These guys are giants, and we're like grasshoppers in their sight. Well, that's the way they felt. Jonathan and Caleb didn't feel that way, or Joshua and Caleb didn't feel that way. Their walls are fortified into the heavens. Again, that's the way they felt. And they said, there's no way we can win against these giants and their fortifications, and we're going to go over there and they're going to take our wives and rape them, and they're going to take our children and make slaves of them, and they're going to kill us. And they just started painting this horrible story of tragedy. And when Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb tried to get them to see through the eyes of faith, the people began to get angry and were going to kill them. And God said, okay, you're not crossing the Jordan. You're not going to go in the promised land. You're going to go back in the desert until this generation dies, and those kids who are going to be raped and in slaves, they will come and win the victory over these giants. And then Israel said, oh, we repent. We forgive us, God. We're going to go. And the next day, they began to go into battle. They crossed the Jordan, and God says to them, you're going to lose. They are giants. Their fortifications are what you guys said was absolutely correct. If you take God out of the equation, there's no way you can win this, and I'm not going with you. You guys will be defeated. And so, again here, is what Saul is saying incorrect? No. It's very correct. But when you add God to the equation, which David was, when David didn't see it was by his strength or by his experience or by his muscles or by his just sheer overpowering this giant, David didn't think that. He knew it would be God and his strength and his power defeating him. And again, man, you want to get, as Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy, get with those who seek the Lord out of a pure heart. And guys, it's so important you get around people who are walking by faith and speaking faith and living in faith. Because if not, you'll have these kind of Saul people that will undermine your faith. And again, the flesh looks at Goliath and says, He's a giant. Who can win? Even me, I'm the biggest, tallest guy with all the armor and the sword and all. I can't win. The man of flesh says he's a giant. Who can win? But the man of faith says he's a giant. Who can miss? He's got a giant forehead, and I don't think I can miss this one. You know, it's like making a basketball hoop 10 times bigger than it normally is and saying, okay, make a free throw. It's like, who can miss? That's the heart of faith. And Saul said to David, and again, I think for most people listening to the king, and here you are, this unknown little shepherd boy from Bethlehem, saying you are not able, could have, and probably most of the time would have decimated the faith of someone. But he says, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said to Saul, just got right back in there, his faith is stirred up, it's not going to be discouraged. And he says, your servant, referring to himself, used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came, so it sounds like this happened more than just twice, but on numerous occasions, had came and took a lamb out of the flock. Notice in verse 35, I went out after it. So David, it sounds like maybe was in a protected environment, maybe hiding out in a cave, and the bear or the lion didn't know he was there, and he's munching on some sheep. And, you know, most shepherds would have said, well, after 2 or 3 sheep, we'll get his fill, and then I'll go out and grab the rest of the sheep and get out of here. But David said, I left my comfortable place of protection, and I went out after that thing, and I struck it, and I delivered, notice in verse 35, the lamb from its mouth. I don't know if you've ever had maybe your dog that you're familiar with, and it's chewing on a bone, and you go to say, hey, outside with that thing, and you go to grab the bone, and that dog looks up with its eyes and growls, and it's like, I don't care that you've been my master from, you know, as long as I can remember, I'm going to bite your hand off if you don't let that bone go. Have you ever, anybody, how many of you guys have had that experience? I think most people have, but imagine a lion or a bear with those eyes looking at you. The lion, one swipe with its paws and you get cut into confetti. Or a bear, one swipe with the claws and you there's not much left of you. And here David goes out and he grabs a hold of that sheep, and the lion and the bear's got its teeth into its, you know, its body, and he's just opening that lion's mouth, that bear's mouth, and ripping it out. Wow. I went after, I struck him, and while that lamb was in his mouth, I took it out. And when it arose against me, it did not like me taking away its dinner out of its mouth. I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. So, you know, at this point, David maybe was 8 years old, 10 years old. We don't know. I was much smaller. And so do the math. A little tiny boy against a wild lion and bear. And let me tell you, that bear was bigger than Goliath. That lion was faster and more fierce than this giant. And I was just a little guy, and I just grabbed it by its beard and killed that thing. Wow. And in verse 36, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine doesn't even recognize he's a giant. It's irrelevant to him. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing this is why, he's defied the armies of the living God. He has blasphemed, and God said, you won't blaspheme unless you're put to death. And the gavel has come down. Judgment from God has been made, and this guy is to be put to death for his blasphemies against the armies of our living God. So we might just stop here and think about this. David could have been setting out with the sheep going, I've got all these brothers and nobody else is out here. Nobody's with me. I'm by myself year after year after year. Poor me. I'm not getting a good education. I'm not able to hang out with Dad, you know. I'm just out here isolated. And of course, we learn that his dad really doesn't really care to have a relationship with him, doesn't think much of him. Poor me, poor me, poor me. But we got to remember that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And even when man is failing us, God will take man's failures and put him right into the equation to bless us. So my dad should have, my mom should have, the government should have, my boss should have, my teacher should have, my brother, my sister, my friends, they all, and they would agree with me. They, in not a small way, in a huge way, failed me. And there's things that I should have been developed in, or relationships I should have had, or opportunities that I totally missed out on because I was year after year after year out and, with the sheep in the wilderness by myself. Well, what happened with David out there? God took it as his school. As we read through the Psalms, many of those are probably written by David as an 8-year-old boy looking at the heavens. God taught him. He had a sweet fellowship with the Lord. And he had many lessons of walking by faith, such as killing the lion and the bear. And I might go back and say, if he didn't have those lessons, would he be ready to fight the giant today? You see, the fact is he had the faith. He had grown and been developed in his faith because of the bravery. And really, it was God giving him a heart of faith and giving him the strength and the bravery to stand up for little helpless sheep. And he's saying, I have been in the school being developed by God for this very hour, by this very day. There is no fear in my heart. There's no doubt in my mind. There is no uncertainty at all. This feels exactly as a very familiar scenario to me. Instead of sheep, it's the children of Israel, God's sheep. Instead of a wild animal, it's a wild giant. This is no different. Yeah, he's got a spear. The other guy has a claw. This guy's got a sword. They had big teeth. It's irrelevant. God, who has done the impossible. No little boy could have grabbed a bear or a lion by its beard and won that battle. It's 100% God. And that's what we need now. I mean, Saul, you can't beat him. And you look across your armies of Israel, there's not one person that can do this. It's either God or nothing. And oftentimes, that's what the Lord does. And this is where God says, speak to the mountain, be uprooted and cast into the sea. Man can't do that. Man can't help God out. Well, here's a couple wheelbarrows. Let me help you out, God. We don't have the ability with all our modern technology in a moment to move a whole mountain. We could blow it up into smithereens, but to move it and cast it into the sea, we still don't have that ability. We can't aid God or help God or be a part of that. It's either God moves the mountain or that mountain doesn't move. I think of that story of Gideon. And remember when the Midianites came up and were this giant host of people. They were like the sand of the sea. And Israel, just a small number of, a few thousand. I think it started out like 33,000. And God told Gideon what? Too many. Because I know you guys, even though there's 1 million of them and 33,000 of you, you will take the credit. You'll say, wow, we were bad, we were strong, we're a mighty army, and not recognize it was 100% God. So get the numbers down. And they went down to 10,000. Remember that? And God says, I know it sounds ridiculous, 1 million of them and 10,000 of you, but this is where you guys are at. You will still take the credit. And so finally, Gideon ends up down with what? 300 guys. And in essence, this is it. This is the same scenario. God is saying, I want it clear it was me that brought about the victory. And David knew that. Notice in verse 37, moreover, David said, the Lord who, past tense, delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will, present tense, deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Guys, there's a saying that says this, and it's something everybody should memorize. God's past faithfulness demands our current trust in Him. We have all had those situations where God has delivered the lion and the bear into our hands. And even though now we're in this giant situation, you know what? It had to be 100% God then, and it has to be 100% God now. And if you were able to squeak out a little mustard seed of faith and believe God to move that mountain, and you're stepping back afterwards going, wow, what just happened? And then it happens again and again. And now you're in another giant situation. His past faithfulness demands your current trust in Him. And that's what David is saying. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. I don't know about you, but it just sounds hollow and empty. It doesn't, as I know Saul and we see his character, it's just sort of not real with him. It's sort of like, go and God be with you. It's just a religious thing. It's not really a faith in Saul's heart like David. But Saul immediately jumps in. Again, the man of the flesh. He jumps in and he says, hey, here's Saul clothed David with his armor. He didn't believe in the armor of God. He put on his bronze helmet and on his head. He didn't trust that God would be the protector of his head. Here, let me clothe you with the coat of mail. I'm not confident that God's going to be able to protect you from Goliath's sword and spear. And David, again, he needs to submit to his king. You don't say no to the king. So he put on the sword and his armor, and he tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And again, Saul was a man a head taller than everybody else. And we know as Samuel was trying to pick out the next king that David wasn't this tall guy. And so it just doesn't fit. And he's trying to be nice about it to Saul, saying, well, any bonehead could see this wouldn't fit me. But David doesn't do that. He's going, I really haven't had a chance to practice with these. And David said to Saul, I cannot even walk with these, more or less fight. I've not tested them. So David took them off respectfully, politely, no doubt. And he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch with which he had. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistines. Now, boy, there's a lot of things through the centuries that speculate, why did David get 5 stones instead of 1, Some said that he was a little nervous and, needed it for the bushes. Others said that later we find out that Goliath had 4 brothers, giant brothers that all end up getting killed. The Jewish mystics said that the stones actually talked to David and said, take us. Like there's some magic thing. So there's all kinds of explanations. We don't know, but I think the best one is we know later that Goliath had 4 equally evil, blasphemous brothers, and David's like, hey, who knows what God's going to do here? I'll just be prepared to take them all down today. But when we go to Israel, and I hope that on the next trip you can all go, but one thing we do is we go to the same exact valley. We see the same exact hills, and there's a stream, usually dried up, just as today. And we go down and we gather stones. And one of the brothers here in the church, Dale Miller, makes us all slingshots. And so we were able to give them to people, and we all practice and usually almost put an eye out until we stop. But normally we would say, get some bags. Israel doesn't mind. Grab some bags and grab some stones. And so I have a few bags of these stones. But here's actually a stone from the river there in the Elah Valley. And this is a great thing to say, guys, this is actually from that valley. This is actually from the river where David chose the same stones. Who knows? This might have been, I think I see a little blood on this one. This might actually be the one that killed Goliath. We don't know for sure. Okay? But here, I love you guys sitting on the front row. There you go. There it is. There's a stone that killed Goliath. At least that's the one we're sticking to. That's the story we're staying with. And though the Philistines came and began to... see, I'm missing something there. Okay. And so David took the smooth stones, put them in his shepherd's bag, and a pouch with his hand, and a sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Again, notice, back in verse 35 there, it says, he came out and went after the lion and the bear. We don't see David, curled up in the fetus position, hiding behind a rock, going, what did I just agree to do? Oh, man. We can often, hypothetically talk about, somebody should go down there and take that guy down. Somebody should probably do that. One of these days, somebody, and it's like, let's sleep on that and think about, and we can always push it, but then there's the moment of reality, isn't there? Where you are walking by faith. And it's often a surreal feeling, isn't it? When you are there in the middle of sharing your faith or stepping out in whatever way God would have you to step out. And David here again, full faith. He's drawing near. And notice in verse 41, the Philistine came and began to draw near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. Isn't this enough? I mean, he's already a giant with a spear and a sword, and he's got another guy, Like, that's not enough. Now there's two of them. And when the Philistines looked about and he saw David, he disdained him. He was deeply, deeply disappointed. He was hoping to at least get, their tallest guy and, at least look like a soldier a little bit, with a sword at least, minimally. And here comes this little boy, guys who have been years in battles got scars and, a few fingers missing and, wrinkles in the face. And here's David with none of that warrior look. He's just a shepherd, and he's got a staff in his hand, and like a shepherd would, and he's this little boy, and Goliath, just to him, it's like Israel spitting on him, presenting this guy to fight with him. It's sort of like we're sacrificing this guy. Here. This has been 40 days, and you've been saying send out a guy, and we haven't, and we're embarrassed, and so basically, we just took somebody that we're willing to let you kill. Sort of a worthless Israeli that doesn't mean much to us. This little shepherd boy, nobody will even notice whether he's dead or alive. Here you go. Sort of like a sacrifice, if you would. And that's the way Goliath took it. Like, oh, man, you guys are just giving me your dregs. And so he disdained him, and for he was only a youth and ruddy and good looking. And so evidently Goliath knew he was a big, ugly guy. He didn't like to be around good-looking guys. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you've come to me with sticks? Hey, that's a shepherd's staff. That's a precious commodity to a shepherd. But yet he's trying to insult him. This is the best he can do. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Wow. He's going to learn later that was the one thing he did not want to do. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. I think really he was trying to intimidate David to get him, to drop that shepherd's staff and go running for the hills. So here's this guy, and he's big and warrior looking, and he's got the big giant voice, Come here. And David, and now he starts looking with this evil, giant, mean warrior look. And he says to him, I'm going to give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David starts shaking, and starts wetting his pants is the idea, and trying to get David to just run. David doesn't shake. He's not afraid. He just gets right back into the Philistine's face and says, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name, the nature of the Lord of hosts, God Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel. It's not us who fights for us. It's God who fights for us. And guys, if you go back When Moses was speaking to the children of Israel, he said, when you guys go out to battle, don't forget. You don't need to count the guys. Don't count them. You don't need to have a bunch of horses. You don't need any chariots. I don't want you to have the arm of the flesh, because I want you to remember that God's fighting for you. And often, God would say, hey, instead of the warriors going out, I want the choir to go out. And as they sing and worship me, God's going to confuse them. They're going to kill each other, and you're just going to walk out, and the battle's already over. God continually does stuff like this to remind them, hey, it's me fighting. Now, sometimes it looks like it's 100% man. It looks like it is man doing it. And this is why, again, sometimes people get confused, saying, well, since the Lord fights for me, I guess I just sort of stand and put my hands in my pocket, or I get down and pray and wait for the Lord to bring lightning bolts and kill him, No. Sometimes God does do that. And we see all kinds of unique ways God supernaturally defeated the enemy, and the warriors never had a chance to even pull their sword out of their sheath. But then there's many other times where it looks like it's 100% man. And you're wondering, God, are you involved here at all? Of course he is. And we got to remember, guys, we're walking in cooperation with God. And so we need to fight as if all depends on us. But we need to trust, knowing that all depends upon the Lord. And so David here is saying, hey, I don't know how this is going to come out. I don't know how this is going to look, whether it looks like 100% me or it looks like 100% God. All I know is God, it's always the glory goes to him. He's the one, every victory we have, it's because the Lord gave us that victory. And then he says in verse 46, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. And I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines, not just you, but a whole bunch of the army of the Philistines, to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. That, and here's the key, the end of verse 46, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. I would dare say, wherever you go on planet Earth today, this story of David and Goliath is known, about the little boy killing the giant, not with the arm of the flesh, not with a spear, not with a sword, but with a slingshot and a rock. One who was technologically inferior, one who was in size inferior, experience inferior, in every way, but yet God brought the victory. And in essence, this is why God does this. This is why God often puts us up between a rock and a hard place, where it looks like all is going to be lost. Unless God comes through. And you know what? The fact is we, because of the weakness of our flesh, often would not choose to walk by faith as we should. So God will choose it for us. And there may be some areas right now that you should be walking by faith. Maybe it's in the area of finances. Maybe it's in the area of obedience in your marriage, or area of forgiveness. And instead of stepping out in faith and going to that person and saying, forgive me, pride wells up, arrogance wells up, and you keep your mouth shut and you don't step out in faith, and you're not choosing faith, and God's going to keep putting you in a place until circumstance humble you and break you, and you will do what you should have done all along. God loves us too much to leave us alone. And it is incredibly painful to walk by faith, okay? I can tell you, and I've never walked by faith and go, oh, this is so wonderful, I'm so glad, it's so easy, this is all, every time I am dragging to get there. It's like, oh, I just wish I had a pile of money. I just wish I had a pile of health. I wish I just had everything. I just wished I was all the blessings, without having to walk by. But God doesn't do that too often. He typically waits till the 11th hour. We're right down to the last penny. We're at the end of our strength, as Paul said, pushed above measure, beyond strength, despairing of life itself. That's the norm, isn't it? And we are walking by faith. But then you know what? There's times we just won't walk by faith even then. And God will put us in a circumstance where you have no choice. Either he comes through or you perish. I love the story here because David chose it. And I really think if you stop and think about 1 Samuel 17, that is the point that will come across greater than any other point in this chapter. Is David chose to walk by faith. Had he said, wow, you guys got an interesting situation here. Got to head back home. Dad had said, get right back and watch the sheep. Got to go. No one would have thought less of David. No one would have said, what a coward. No one even would have considered him to be the one to go fight in battle. But the fact is, like the widow, where Jesus observing everybody who put their money in, and she gave all that she had. And he said, look at all these millionaires. And they gave a portion. But I say before God and from God's eyes, she gave more than all of them put together. Why? Because all of them gave out of a comfortable percent. But she gave all that she had. And in the same way here, I think we see that David put his life on the line. He stepped out in faith when nobody was expecting it. And it's because he really believed in a God who would bring down this giant as he had brought down in many other situations of his life. And then he says in verse 47, all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword and the spear. I hope somebody writes this down and gets it back to Saul. Saul really needs to hear this message too. Not just you uncircumcised evil giant and your sidekick there. Our King Saul needs to remember this. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into, notice now David turns it, into our hands. Guys, understand this. God uses the faith of other people to stir us up. But they cannot walk by faith for you. They cannot bring the victory for you. And you will not experience the blessings or receive the spoils unless you then, once you are stirred up to walk by faith, actually obey and walk in faith. You understand that? So if there's one on fire Christian here, and he leads 20 people to Christ every week, and he's discipling 100 people, and he sings so beautifully, we just all want to stop and listen to him sing worship. And he's hearing from God, prophecies, words of knowledge, words of wisdom, and everybody sort of just flocks around this guy after church and just gets a little bit of what God's speaking to him and what God's doing, and wow, it's amazing. And the rest of us are just sort of lukewarm Christians or just sort of doing the minimum. The thing is, we will never be a dynamic church, will we? The greatness of a church, it's always the sum of the whole. We can have dynamic parts, but we all have to come to be people of prayer. We all have to come to be people of obedience in every area of our life. And guys, God is waiting on us, it says in Isaiah 30, to be the people of God that he can bless. As you're sitting here tonight, I believe it's the Lord's will that every seat would be filled here. It's awesome to have all you guys here. And it was awesome that some people responded this morning and came to Christ. But I know it's God's will that every one of you lead people to Christ and disciple people. And every one of us become a people of prayer and of just, we talked about this morning, I mentioned first service, not second service, just how when there is that repentance, there's this clearing of yourself, that the priorities change. And instead of wanting to give God the minimum, we just can't give God enough. And the guy who's saying, man, I'll give God Sunday mornings only hour and 15 minutes, hour and 16 minutes, I'm getting bitter. Pastor, shut up. Get me out of here. Maybe I'll just leave and protest. in the middle of your prayer, your final prayer, the end of that, because, man, I'm squeaking out. Even an hour and 15 minutes is getting hard for me. Be better if it was an hour. 45 minutes, even better, It's just this, it's something in the heart. But then when the heart changes, it's like, God, I give you, Howard, there is no time. I no longer calculate time. I'm not squeaking out 5 minutes. I read my chapter of the day. Hope you're satisfied. Get rid of the Bible. Get my magazine. Okay. It's no longer that. Trying to live on the crumbs of what God has. It's no longer time. It's like, I can't give God enough of my time. I can't, here I am. I'll share the Lord with one person this year, and that's it, God. And I hope you're satisfied. The guy told me to go to hell. That's it. Okay, I'm done. That's why I never did witness to begin. Next year I might not even do one. It stops being this thing where you're reluctant and squeaking it out and angry when you got to walk by faith and angry when God isn't blessing you as much as you want to be blessed. And when there's a repentive heart, we talked about this morning how we all need to live in that sense that we all fall short daily of the glory of God, that we all need to walk in that heart where Jesus says, forgive us today our trespasses. We forgive others who trespass. I know people are going to sin against me tomorrow, and we need to be ready to have a heart of graciousness and forgiveness ahead of time. I guarantee you 100% of everybody here, man is going to sin against you tomorrow somewhere. And if you are not in the mind of Christ, ready to forgive them and love them and pray for them and bless them and do good to them, you're going to be overcome with evil rather than evil being overcome with good. In the same way, God knows we're going to fall short of the glory. And so we need to enter the day going, God, I want to live holy and righteous, but I know that the righteous man stumbles in many ways. But as a righteous man falls 7 times, by your grace, get me up. And we just sort of go through the day with that teachable, humble, broken heart. And God can utilize that. And all of a sudden now, I can't get enough of the Lord. I can't meditate on the Word enough. I can't pray enough. I can't give enough. I can't love my wife or my husband or my kids enough. I can't share the faith enough. There's a whole other mind frame that happens. You think of the church of Laodicea, the lukewarm Christians, versus the on fire believers. And I'll tell you again, as I have mentioned, probably it sounds like a broken record, going to third world countries, it's a blessing because they don't have TVs at home. They don't have money to go to the movies. The highlight of their week is getting together with the church. That is their entertainment. That is everything to them. They get there a couple hours early and they want to you worship for 45 minutes, you have mutiny on your hands. They want hours of worship. And if you preach for an hour, you better be ready to preach another sermon in a few minutes after we worship some more. They can't get enough. It's just a completely different mind frame. In Africa, they can't afford watches. I remember first time being there, and I asked the pastor, Stephen Kinchenko, I said, now, help me understand the schedule this week. When am I speaking, what time, and all that? And he goes, whenever you show up, whenever you start preaching, that's the time we start. And I couldn't get it. And finally, we were sitting around the breakfast table. He goes, okay, Bryan, you're speaking at 9 and 11 and 1. I'm like, thank you. Let me write this down. And all the other pastors are just rolling laughing at me. And I'm like, what's so funny about the schedule? And he goes, I've told you like 5 times, nobody owns a watch. They don't know if it's 9. They don't know if it's 10. They don't know if it's 11. They have no idea. Well, what time is lunch then? When we start eating. And it was it was so freeing. And just to go into a church and people are fellowshipping, enjoying one another, it was just freeing. What time did we start? When we start singing. That's when we started. When are you finished preaching? When you stop. And I guarantee you, no matter how long you preach, it will be too short for these people. They have a hunger that cannot be quenched even with a 5-hour sermon. They'll be disappointed when you say we're stopping. And how it's the opposite in our mind, isn't it? And there's just a liberation with that heart of walking by faith. There's that heart of repentance. And we see David here now saying, my faith is going to spur the faith of others. And my victory is going to cause the victory of others. And as I step out in faith and go against this giant, he has 4 brothers. And there's going to be another fellow Israeli soldier who didn't have the faith to go against Goliath, who's going to be chasing after his brother, who's bigger than his Goliath and is a better warrior than Goliath. You see what I'm saying? And David's already predicting it's not going to happen with all the Israeli soldiers. Some of them are still going to be hiding behind the rock or running the opposite direction. But the majority of the Israeli soldiers are going to be spurred as I kill Goliath, as I chop off his head and hold up his head on the end of his spear. Their faith is just going to get welled up. And that which they knew they should have done, they're now going to see that all things are possible with God, and they're going to have victories as well as me today. And I'm telling you today, you're my victory, but your fellow Philistine soldiers are going to be the victories of my fellow Israeli soldiers today. And in verse 48, so it was, when the Philistines rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David, I love this, again, faith, he hurried and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. Listen, this little boy, he's not like, sort of sheepishly, no pun intended, thinking about it, contemplating, he is running at this guy. And then he realizes, I don't even have a rock in my slingshot, So he's running and bouncing. He's trying to grab a rock out of his pouch and trying to get his slingshot and get the rock in the slingshot. And he's like, wow, just in the nick of time here, getting ahead of myself. Sorry if you didn't know David wins. I just read the whole story for you. Anyway, so David in verse 49, he put his hand into the bag and he took out the stone and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, which again, is not humanly possible, is it? And he, Goliath, fell on his face to the earth. Again, we saw when they brought the tabernacle into Dagon, the Philistines' temple. They got up the next morning, and what happened to Dagon? Face down in the temple. They stand Dagon up. He's falling down until he starts falling to pieces. His arms are falling off. His head falls off. Guys, it's just a good memory for us as Philippians 2. One day every knee shall bow. Every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And Goliath was unwilling to fall on his face before God, that he might be with the Lord for eternity. But the facts are the facts. God is God. And one day people that will be going into eternal hell will recognize that and confess that before they go into the lake of fire forever and ever and ever. Jesus said again, fall upon the rock and be broken. Unless that rock one day falls on you and crushes you to powder. And if we would just step back and say, boy, Goliath is in hell forever. He could have believed. Oh, he's a pagan. Let's go back. Remember the book of Ruth? I forgot to teach that book. Sorry about that, guys. So excited to get on. But remember, she was a Moabite. Well, you guys remember anybody else? What about a prostitute from Jericho? Rahab the harlot. She believed in God. Goliath, like any human being on earth, could believe in God, but yet he is on his face in the dust, and if you would, declaring that the whole world would know there is a God in Israel, all the earth would know. And then it goes on to say there, as we quickly finish up here, verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Guys, it was as simple as can be. Therefore, David ran. Again, he's walking by faith. And he stood over the Philistine and took his sword, Goliath's sword, and drew it out of his sheath. And he killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, their faith is being stirred up. And now they pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley to the gates of Ekron. Guys, that's seriously deep into enemy territory. They are running by houses, by villages. They are running by Philistines that didn't go out to war. They're walking by faith, guys. They're going into as dangerous a situation as David was with Goliath. They're walking by faith. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Sharim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistines and brought it to Jerusalem and put his armor in his tent. Now, guys, verse 54, we're going to discover that it wasn't till David became king that he conquered the city of Jerusalem, conquered the Jebusites, and took it over. At this time, the Jebusites were enemies of Israel, living in the city of Jerusalem. And so the question here is, did David do that at this moment? He was not that far away. He could have. But most think that it was at a later date that David, who, you got your lion's head and your bear's head and you got Goliath's head, that he kept that as a trophy. And that later as a king, he had that as a trophy for people to remember the great work that God had done. Or it is possible that this little boy comes running up with Goliath's head and into the city of Jerusalem, the enemies that would have killed an Israeli boy. But yet God protected him, and he ran away around saying, look what God has done. And you guys are next. And in essence, prophesying, predicting their doom. It's a possibility. And then he took his armor. We're going to later see in this same book about Goliath's sword. And when Saul saw David going out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? Again, he's now my in-law. He's going to be marrying my daughter, and his dad's not going to be paying taxes anymore. And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. So the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite from Bethlehem. And Lord, we just come before you, and we all have been stirred up as so many times. For many of us can remember this story as a small, small child, not even remembering our age, 3, 4, 5 years old. Maybe one of the earliest childhood memories we have is the flannel graph story of our Sunday school teacher putting Goliath and little David up there. I know I can remember this story as long as I've been on this earth, but yet here we are, the living Word of God stirring us up once again. I'm just going to ask all of us to stand right now as the band comes up. I'm just going to ask a couple of the leaders just to stand up and let your heart just cry out to God tonight on what we are as a church and where we need to be. The obedience we have, but the greater obedience we need. And go ahead, Jeff Flanagan, just start off there.
Father, we just